Mira walked beside Raul through the main corridor, every light glowing steady now after the fight in the maintenance hub. But she didn't trust the comm. Not after what she had seen. They're not gone. She said softly, they never are. Raul replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes kept scanning every shadow. This quiet. Is there a way of waiting? They reached the command center. Mira's stomach tightened. Most of the control panels were dead, their screens cracked and flickering. The captain and the rest of the crew had evacuated to the emergency pods hours ago. Only Mira and Raul remained on the station. They had chosen to stay. Raul began checking the long-range sensors. No life signs inside the station except us, he said. But he stopped. But what? Mira asked. He turned the screen toward her. Outside, in the dark void beyond the station's hull, dozens of faint heat signatures floated closer. They moved slowly, but with purpose. They're coming, Mira whispered. Raul nodded. And this time, they are bringing all their strength. The shadows, the Varen, weren't just inside anymore. They had a fleet of them in space, drifting like living smoke toward the station. What do we do? She asked. Raul's eyes narrowed. We make sure they never reach another human station again. They moved quickly, gathering supplies. Raul explained his plan. The station's core reactor could be overloaded, sending a massive energy wave through the surrounding space. It would destroy the Varen entirely, but it would also destroy the station. And us, Mira said. Realizing what he was implying, Raul looked at her. There'll be a way to survive. If we reach the escape pod at the far end of the dock, before the wave hits, we will have only minutes. Minutes? It is enough if we are fast. Mira took a deep breath. Then let's do it. The first breach came before they were ready. A loud metallic groan echoed through the hull. Lights flickered. The air turned cold again. They are here, Raul said. The corridor ahead of them darkened. Black shapes began to form, tall, fluid, moving like smoke underwater. Theirs filled the air. Mira switched on her torch, but this time the shadows didn't stop moving. They pushed forward, ignoring the light more than before. They've adapted, Raul warned. Stay close. They fought their way forward. Raul's pulse emitter fired in short bursts, each shot tearing through a shadow. But there were always more. Mira swept the torch in wide arcs, trying to slow them just enough for Raul to clear a path. They reached the reactor room. The thick steel door slid shut behind them, sealing them in. This is it, Raul said, moving to the control panel. His hands worked fast, entering override codes. Sparks flew as he disconnected safety systems. The shadows slammed against the door outside. Each impact made the metal bend slightly. They're not going to wait politely, Mira said, watching the dent in the door grow deeper. They will not need to, Raul replied. I am almost finished. The final code went in a deep hum filled the room. The lights shifted to red, reactor overloaded for minutes. A voice announced through the speakers. Raul turned. Now we run. They burst out into the corridor, heading for the docking bay. The shadows were everywhere now, crawling along the walls, sliding from the ceiling, rising from the floor. They didn't try to hide anymore. They struck. One lashed at Mira's arm. She swung the torch into it, breaking it apart. But the force made her stumble. Raul caught her, pulling her forward. Don't stop, he shouted. The corridor curved ahead. The docking bay door was in sight, but between them and safety, a massive shadow blocked the path. It was larger than any they had faced before, its form swirling with hundreds of smaller shapes inside. It is their leader, Raul said. The creature moved forward. It hissed deeper, almost like speech. Keep going, Raul told her, stepping in front of the thing. What are you doing? Mira asked. I will hold it. You get the pod ready. No way, she said. We finish this together. They both stepped forward, side by side. Raul fired the emitter at full power. Mira used the torch's beam like a blade, cutting through the shadow's arms as they reached for them. The leader shrieked, splitting into two smaller shapes, then reforming again. It's not breaking. Mira cried. Then we pushed harder, Raul yelled, firing again. Mira spotted a cluster of emergency flood lamps on the wall. She ran to them, grabbed two, and turned them on full power, aiming both beams directly into the creature's core. The shadow convulsed, twisting violently. Rahl fired one last burst into it, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces that scattered across the floor, then faded away. Go, he shouted. They reached the pod with less than a minute left. Mira scrambled into the controls, Rahl sealing the hatch behind them. The reactor's hum had turned into a deep roar. The pod launched just as the station's emergency alarms screamed their final warning. Through the small window, Mira saw the station in the distance. Shadows swarmed over its surface, but then a blinding white light erupted from the core. The waves spread outward, pure energy sweeping across space. Every shadow it touched dissolved instantly, leaving only empty darkness behind. When the light faded, the station was gone. Silence filled the pod. Mira sat back, breathing hard. We did it. Rahl nodded slowly. Yes, but your home is gone. She looked at him. Home isn't just walls and corridors. It's the people you survive with. For a moment, Rahl didn't answer. Then, quietly, he said, Then I suppose I am home too. Mira smiled faintly. You are. They sat together in the pod, drifting toward the nearest human colony. Beacon, outside, the stars were calm again. No hissing, no shadows, for now. The twin suns of Avarice Prime were setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. From the highest balcony of the royal palace, Princess Leora stood in silence, watching the light fade over the silver rivers that cut through the city. The people called her the jewel of Avarice, beautiful, graceful, and wise beyond her years. But in the court, she was known for something else. She had turned away every suitor who came to claim her hand. The palace had seen many visitors over the years. Princes from distant star systems arrived in ships made of crystal and steel. Merchants from the galaxy's richest trade routes brought gifts of rare stones that glowed in the dark. Generals in shining armor spoke of great victories and promised to defend her kingdom with unmatched strength. Yet, no matter how grand the offer, Leora always said the same word no. Some called her too proud. Others whispered that she was waiting for someone extraordinary. But the truth was simpler. She wanted someone who cared for her as a person, not just as a prize. From the day she was old enough to understand her duties, Leora had been told her marriage was not just her choice, it was a matter of politics. Her union would strengthen alliances, unite planets, and protect Avarice Prime from rivals. Every visit from a suitor was treated like a royal negotiation to the court. Love was an afterthought, almost a luxury. But to Leora, it was the heart of the matter. She had seen too many unions built on strategy alone, where the couple smiled in public but lived like strangers in private. That would not be her life. On this evening, the grand hall was alive with music and the low murmur of conversation. Another suitor had arrived, a tall, golden-skinned noble from the Andral sector. His voice was deep and polished, his cloak lined with threads of starlight. He bowed low before the princess, his eyes glittering with ambition. My lady, he began, I bring you the treasures of my world, rivers of liquid silver, forests that sing in the wind, and cities that touch the clouds. With me, you will rule over a realm that spans 10 moons. The courtiers leaned forward, eager for her reply. Some smiled, certain that this time she could not refuse. But Leora simply offered a polite smile. Your gifts are generous, she said. Your worlds sound beautiful. But tell me, what is your favorite sound in those singing forests? What do you dream of when you close your eyes at night? The noble blinked, taken off guard. My favorite sound, he repeated, as though the question were strange. I have never thought of it. In my dreams, I dream of expanding my realm, of making my name remembered in the histories of 1,000 planets. Leora nodded slowly. She knew her answer before he finished speaking. Then I wish you success in your dreams, she said gently. But I am not part of them. A ripple of surprise ran through the hall. The noble's face stiffened, but he bowed again and left without another word. The king, her father, watched her from the high throne. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried across the hall. Another no, Leora. Yes, father. She replied, meeting his gaze. He sighed. You are my daughter, and your will is strong. But there will come a day when choice will not be so simple. I know, she said softly. But until that day, I will wait for someone who sees me, not just my crown, later, in her private chambers. Leora removed her jeweled headpiece and placed it on the table. Without the crown, she felt lighter, almost like the girl she had been before court life consumed her days. She sat by the window, looking at the sky. Stars were beginning to appear, one by one. Somewhere out there, she thought, was someone different. Someone who would not care for her wealth or her title. Someone who would speak to her as Leora. Not as the princess of Avarice Prime. She did not know what world he or she might come from. She did not know when they would meet. But she believed they would. Down in the streets, the city glowed with life. Markets were still open, selling food from across the galaxy. Traders called out their wares. Children chased each other between stalls. And music drifted from the open doors of cafes. It was a world full of movement, full of voices she rarely heard from her place in the palace. Sometimes, Leora wished she could walk among them without the weight of her title. She wanted to hear unpolished stories, meet people who did not measure every word. Her maid, a gentle woman named Mira, entered quietly. You turned away another one today, she said with a smile. Yes, Leora replied, smiling back. Mira set a tray of tea on the table. The right one will come, princess. But when he does, I hope you recognize him before you send him away like the rest. Leora laughed softly. If he is the right one, I will know. Outside, a small ship crossed the night sky, its lights blinking like a moving star. Leora followed its path until it disappeared beyond the horizon. She could not have known it was a diplomatic vessel from Earth, arriving in the outer system for the first time in history. She could not have known that aboard that ship was a human named Daniel, someone who would change everything. The next morning on Avarice Prime was bright and warm. The twin suns shone high, casting golden light across the palace gardens. Birds with shimmering wings sang in the tall crystal trees, and the air smelled faintly of sweet amber leaves. The palace was quiet until the sound of deep chimes rang through the halls. It was the signal that a new delegation had arrived. Princess Leora stood beside her father in the grand reception hall. The king was dressed in a deep blue robe lined with silver thread, his crown resting easily on his head. Around them, advisors whispered quietly, speaking of trade agreements and political deals. The arrival today was important, a diplomatic mission from a distant world called Earth. Few on Avarice Prime had met humans before. They were a young species in galactic terms, only recently welcomed into interstellar councils. Some nobles saw them as untested too inexperienced to matter. In the great web of politics, others saw them as an opportunity, new markets, new technology, new allies. Leora had no strong opinion. She had read about humans in the archives. They were physically smaller than some alien races, yet surprisingly adaptable. They had a long history of wars and peace, of invention and mistakes. But facts in a book were not the same as meeting one in person. The great doors opened. The human delegation stepped inside, led by an ambassador in a dark formal coat. He walked with measured steps, offering a polite bow to the king. Behind him came 3 others, 2 aides carrying documents and equipment, and one man who stood slightly apart from the rest. He was dressed simply, in a plain uniform without bright colors or rich metals. His hair was dark and slightly messy, his expression calm but curious. His eyes moved across the hall, not with the sharp calculation of the other visitors, but with quiet wonder. When his gaze met Leora's, he did not bow immediately. Instead, he gave a small nod, almost like a greeting between equals. It was unusual but not rude. The ambassador began speaking in the formal language of avarice, offering greetings and gifts. On behalf of Earth and its United Nations, we bring our hopes for friendship and cooperation. He said, our people wish to learn, to share knowledge, and to build trust. Leora listened politely, her hands folded in front of her. It was the same kind of speech she had heard from countless visitors, yet Her eyes kept drifting to the man standing quietly at the back. When the formalities ended, the guests were invited to a welcome banquet in the palace gardens. The long tables were set with fruits that glowed softly in the evening light, crystal pitchers of spiced water, and dishes from both Avarice and the visiting worlds. Leora noticed that the quiet human whose name she overheard as Daniel sat at the far end of the table, speaking little but listening intently to the conversations around him. Most of the court ignored him, choosing instead to focus on the ambassador and the other aides. She found herself curious when the meal ended. Guests began to walk among the gardens, admiring the strange flowers and the tall silver-leaf trees. Leora moved through the crowd gracefully, nodding to nobles, answering polite questions until she spotted Daniel near a fountain shaped like a spiraling star. He was looking at the water, where small luminous fish swam in lazy circles. "You are far from the main table," she said, stepping closer. He turned to her, surprised. "I didn't want to get in the way of the important talks. You are part of the delegation. Does that not make you important?" she asked. A small smile appeared on his face. "I'm here as a cultural envoy. My job is to learn about Avarice Prime's customs and traditions. The ambassadors handle the politics. I just listen and try to understand." Leora tilted her head. "Most visitors I meet are eager to speak, to impress, to show their worth. You seem different." "I don't think my worth is something I can prove in a speech," Daniel said simply. "I'd rather learn first. In this place," he looked at the silver leaves swaying above them, "is unlike anything I've ever seen." There was no flattery in his tone, no hidden meaning. He was speaking honestly, as if he were simply sharing a thought. Leora found it strangely refreshing. "Tell me," she asked, "what is your home like?" Daniel's eyes softened. "It depends where you stand. Earth has snow-covered mountains, endless forests, oceans bigger than some moons. But it also has crowded cities, noisy streets, and places where the stars are hard to see. My favorite place is a small hill outside my town. At night, you can see the Milky Way stretch across the sky. It makes you feel small, but in a good way." Leora smiled. She was used to hearing about planets in terms of power, wealth, and resources. Rarely did anyone speak of their favorite hill. They spoke for a while longer about music, about food, about the way light on Avarice Prime made the rivers look like flowing silver. When the sound of chimes signaled the evening's end, Leora realized she had been smiling more than she had in weeks. As Daniel bowed politely and prepared to leave with the delegation, Leora felt an odd sense of disappointment. Back in her chambers, she thought about their conversation. It had not been about treaties or wealth. There had been no attempt to impress her. Yet it had felt real. Mira, her maid, noticed the distant look on her face. "Something on your mind, princess?" Leora hesitated before answering. "Just a conversation with a human." "A human?" Mira smiled knowingly. "Perhaps you will have more conversations with him before they leave." Leora said nothing, but she found herself hoping the same. Far across the city, in the guest wing of the palace, Daniel sat by his small window. From there, he could see the twin suns fading and the first stars appearing. Somewhere in those stars, he thought, was the reason he had come here. And perhaps though he didn't quite admit it to himself yet, he had already met it. The next day, the palace was alive with movement. Delegates from different worlds wandered its long crystal halls, each on their own mission. Some were there for trade, others for alliances, and some simply to see the beauty of Avarice Prime, Princess. Leora had many duties that morning: meetings with advisors, a tour of the palace archives with visiting scholars, and a formal lunch with her father. But through it all, she found her thoughts returning to the quiet human named Daniel. It was unusual for her to think of a visitor once they left the hall. She had met countless faces, heard countless speeches, and forgotten most of them by the next day. But Daniel's words still lingered in her mind, not because they were grand or clever, but because they had been different. That afternoon, the delegates were given a tour of the palace gardens and library. Leora had been asked to guide the group through the oldest wing of the library, where records from thousands of years were kept. It was a place of silence and deep light. the walls lined with shelves that reached toward the domed ceiling. She walked at the front of the group, explaining the meaning of certain carvings and the history of the great glass windows. When she reached a section displaying ancient star maps, she noticed Daniel standing slightly apart from the rest, examining a mural. It was a painting of the first journey, the legendary voyage when the people of Avarice left their homeworlds, surfaced to build the first cities in the sky. "You seem interested," she said, stepping closer. Daniel glanced at her, smiling faintly. "I am. On Earth, our first journeys into space were clumsy and dangerous. Looking at this, I wonder if your people felt the same fear we did, or if it was only excitement." "There was fear," Leora replied, "but also hope. My ancestors believed that moving to the sky would keep them safe from storms and floods. They thought they would be closer to the stars and perhaps closer to the gods." Daniel nodded, his eyes still on the painting. "It's strange," he said softly. "No matter how different our worlds are, some things seem the same. The need to explore, the fear of the unknown, the hope for something better." Leora studied him for a moment. He did not speak like the others, always trying to make themselves seem greater than they were. He spoke as if he were uncovering a truth. The group moved on, but Leora slowed her steps until she and Daniel were walking at the back. "You ask questions no one else asks," she said. Daniel looked curious. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "It is different," she admitted. "Most who come here speak of what they can offer my world. They talk of power, trade, or influence. You speak of hills and stars." Daniel chuckled softly. "I guess I don't know how to speak like an ambassador. I just ask what I'm curious about." "Then what are you curious about now?" Leora asked. He thought for a moment. "What is your favorite place in the palace?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "No one has ever asked me that." "Then I'll be the first," Daniel said with a smile. Leora hesitated, then motioned for him to follow. She led him through a smaller side hall, away from the tour group, until they reached a quiet balcony overlooking the western valley. The sun was beginning to set, and the river below shimmered in the light. "This," she said softly, "this is where I come when I want to be alone. From here, I can see the villages beyond the city walls, the people there live without courts or politics. They farm, trade, sing. Sometimes I wish I could join them just for a day." Daniel leaned against the railing, looking at the scene. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "I can see why you come here." For a while, they stood in silence, watching the sky change color. It was the kind of silence that felt comfortable, not awkward. Finally, Daniel asked, "Do you ever get tired of being a princess?" Leora glanced at him. "Yes, but it is not something I can stop being. It is a part of me, like the rivers are. Part of this world. I can wish for a different life, but I cannot truly leave this one." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "On Earth, we have a saying, you can't choose the sky you're born under, but you can choose where you walk beneath it. I guess it means you can't change where you start, but you can choose your path." Leora considered his words. "And what path have you chosen?" Daniel looked out at the horizon. "To learn. To see as much of the galaxy as I can before my time runs out. And maybe to find something worth staying for." His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made Leora's heart beat a little faster. She didn't know why. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. An aide appeared, bowing respectfully. "Princess, the king requests your presence in the council hall." Leora straightened. "Tell him I will be there shortly." The aide left, and Leora turned back to Daniel. "You should return to your group before someone notices you are gone." Daniel gave a small smile. "I'll see you again, Princess Leora." When he walked away, she stood on the balcony for a moment longer, watching the light fade over the valley. She felt different. She had spoken to many visitors, but rarely had she felt such ease in conversation. It was as if they had skipped the usual walls and gone straight to something real. That night, Leora found herself replaying his words in her mind, to find something worth staying for. She didn't know yet if he had meant her world or something else entirely, but she knew. She wanted to find out. The palace buzzed with unusual excitement. Word had spread quickly. The princess would soon begin the trials of worthiness, the ancient custom to choose a royal match for centuries. These trials have been used to test the character of those seeking the hand of avarice royalty. They were not simple contests of beauty or wealth. They were meant to show strength, wisdom, and compassion. Few outsiders had ever attempted them. Fewer still had succeeded. Leora had not yet agreed to marry anyone, but the court insisted that tradition must be followed. Her father, the king, saw it as a way to settle the endless parade of suitors. When the announcement was made, nobles from across the galaxy prepared themselves. Alien princes sharpened their blades. Generals trained for battle. Merchants studied ancient puzzles and bought the rarest gifts. And among them, unexpectedly, was a human Daniel. He had not planned to compete. When he heard of the trials, he quietly stepped aside, thinking they were meant for warriors and leaders. But Leora found him in the gardens the evening before. "The first test, you will take part," she said simply. Daniel shook his head. "I'm not a prince. I don't have soldiers or treasures. I'm not even sure I could pass your tests." "You do not need to be sure," Leora replied. "You only need to try. You speak of courage and of walking your own path. This is part of mine, and I would see where yours leads." Her voice carried a tone that was not quite a request and not quite a command. Daniel smiled faintly. "All right, I'll try. The first trial, strength next day." The grand arena filled with citizens eager to watch the trials. The first challenge was strength, not simply brute force, but the ability to endure and adapt. The competitors faced a massive obstacle course designed by the palace guards. It began with towering walls, moved into heavy stone blocks that needed lifting, and ended with a race across shifting platforms above a deep pool. The alien princes surged forward with powerful leaps. Some had extra limbs for climbing, others had skin like armor. Daniel was slower at the start, his smaller human frame making the walls more difficult. The crowd assumed he would fall far behind, but Daniel used his agility. Where others tried to smash through obstacles, he found ways to climb around them. He used balance instead of force on the shifting platforms. By the end, he crossed the finish line not first, but in the middle, far better than anyone had expected. From the royal balcony, Leora allowed herself a small, proud smile. The second trial, wisdom that afternoon. The competitors gathered in the palace library for the trial of wisdom. On the table before them lay an ancient puzzle, a sphere of crystal and metal, locked by hidden mechanisms. The challenge was to open it without breaking it. According to legend, the puzzle represented the unity of the galaxy, something fragile, yet worth protecting. The alien contenders attacked the puzzle with speed, twisting and pulling at its layers. Daniel sat quietly at first, studying the design. "What are you waiting for?" one of the princes taunted. "Understanding," Daniel said simply. He examined the small symbols etched along the edges. They were not from avarice, but from several worlds, each representing a part of the mechanism. Slowly, carefully, he pressed the symbols in a sequence that told a story how the worlds had once worked together to survive a great storm. With a soft click, the sphere opened in his hands. Gasps echoed in the room. Even the judges leaned forward in surprise. Daniel placed the open sphere on the table and stepped back without a word. The third trial, Compassion Thief final trial, came the next morning. It was held in the open valley beyond the palace walls. The test was not announced beforehand. Tradition said that compassion could only be shown without warning. The competitors were told to race to a distant marker. The first to touch it would win the trial. The moment the signal sounded, they ran. Daniel kept pace with the middle group. The air was hot, the ground uneven. Halfway through the course, a loud cry broke the rhythm. One of the competitors, a young merchant's son from the Northern Isles, had tripped and twisted his leg. Most of the runners glanced back but kept going. The race was still on, and victory meant honor. Daniel stopped. He knelt beside the injured man. "Can you walk?" The man shook his head, his face pale. Without hesitation, Daniel lifted him onto his back. It slowed his pace to a crawl. Others sped past. The crowd in the stands muttered in confusion. By the time Daniel reached the marker, the race had been over for minutes, but he carried the young man all the way. setting him down gently where the healers waited. When the judges announced the results, Daniel had technically lost the race, but the crowd stood and applauded him. The trial was not about speed, it was about the choice he made, and he had chosen well. After the trials that evening, the palace was quieter. Competitors rested from the strain, and the air was heavy with anticipation for the choosing ceremony in a few days. Daniel sat in the garden, leaning against a crystal tree. His body ached from the trials, but his mind was clear. He had not come to win. He had only wanted to honor Leora's request to try. He heard footsteps and looked up to see the princess approaching. Her gown shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and her expression was unreadable. "You did not win every challenge," she said. "I didn't expect to." Daniel replied with a shrug. "But you faced each one without giving up," she continued. "And you showed something many here do not understand. Kindness is not weakness." Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm glad you think so." They stood in silence for a moment. The night air filled with the distant sound of the river. "Daniel," Leora said quietly, "these trials were never about choosing the strongest or the richest. They were about finding someone who understands what matters most to this world. You may not realize it, but you have passed." She turned to leave. Before he could answer, Daniel watched her go, wondering what she truly meant somewhere deep inside. He felt that the real test had only just begun. In the markets of Avarice Prime, merchants spoke of the human who had dared to compete against alien nobles. In the palace corridors, guards exchanged quiet comments about the man who had lifted an injured rival instead of racing to win. And in the royal court, the whispers carried a sharper edge, one of doubt and suspicion. Daniel had not expected praise, but neither had he expected so much attention. Some approached him with genuine respect, asking questions about Earth and its customs. Others only offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. He knew enough to sense that not all of them wished him well. The discontent in the court. The king's council chamber, the mood was tense. A group of high-ranking nobles had gathered without the princess present. "This human," one said, his voice sharp, "has no title, no army, and no wealth. Yet the people speak of him as if he were a hero." Another, a silver-skinned governor from the northern provinces, frowned. "Princess Leora is young. She does not yet see the danger of following her heart instead of her duty. Choosing him would bring no political advantage." An older counselor leaned forward. "It would be worse than useless. It would be an insult to the great houses who have sent their sons here." The king listened quietly, saying nothing. His eyes were calm, but his fingers tapped the armrest of his chair. "We cannot allow sentiment to decide the future of Avarice," the first noble pressed. "If she chooses him, she chooses weakness." A quiet meeting that evening. Leora found Daniel in the gardens. The glow from the silver leaf trees bathed the paths in soft light. "You look troubled," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I've heard the whispers. Not everyone's happy that I'm still here. They're afraid," Leora said simply. "Not of you, but of what you represent. They believe power is measured in ships, armies, and gold. You show them something they cannot measure." He looked at her carefully. "And what is that?" "A different kind of strength," she replied. "The kind they cannot control." They walked in silence for a while, the night air cool and filled with the scent of flowers. "You should be careful," Leora added softly. "Some in this court will not accept you quietly. They may try to drive you away." Daniel gave a small, wry smile. "I've faced worse, but thank you for the warning." The sabotage walkway the next day. The delegation was invited to tour the Sky Garden's vast platforms suspended above the city by anti-gravity fields. The gardens floated so high that the rivers below looked like thin silver threads. As the group walked along one of the narrow bridges between platforms, Daniel felt a faint tremor under his boots. He slowed, glancing down at the walkway seams. Something looked wrong. Before he could react, a section of the bridge shifted. The floor tilted, and his balance slipped. A sharp cry rang out as Daniel's foot slid toward the edge. The space below was a dizzying drop into the lower city. A hand caught his wrist, strong, steady, unyielding. "Hold on!" It was Leora. Her Other hand gripped the railing as she pulled him back onto the walkway. The sudden movement startled the group, and guards rushed forward. The bridge section was quickly sealed off. One of the engineers examined it and confirmed what Daniel had already suspected. This was no accident. Someone had loosened the locking bolts. Leora's voice was low and dangerous. "This was meant for you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Or for both of us." Whispers turned to shadows after the incident. The atmosphere in the palace shifted. Guards now accompanied Daniel whenever he moved through the halls, though he suspected. They were also there to watch him. Some nobles avoided him entirely, others smiled too much, their politeness hiding something colder. In the council chamber, the talk grew sharper. "This human brings trouble," one said. "Already, his presence causes unrest. Will we wait until real harm comes to the princess?" The king raised a hand. "Enough. The choosing ceremony will decide. Until then, we do not act against anyone without proof." But proof was exactly what the plotters intended to avoid. An honest conversation that night. Daniel found himself once again in the princess's private balcony, the place where they had first spoken about her favorite view. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Leora met his eyes. "And you have saved mine in ways you do not see." He frowned slightly. "I don't know what the choosing ceremony will bring. I'm not here to take anything from your people. I only wanted to learn, and maybe to leave a little better. Then I came. And yet," Leora said softly, "you have given me something no one else has." "What's that?" "Someone who speaks to me as Leora, not as the princess." For a moment, neither spoke. The city lights glittered below like a field of stars, and the twin moons rose slowly into the sky. The storm ahead far from the balcony. In a shadowed corner of the palace, two figures spoke in hushed tones. "The ceremony is in 2 days," one said. "If the princess chooses the human, we lose everything. Then she must not choose him." The other replied coldly, "We will remind her of her duty, and if that fails, we will make the decision for her." The first man hesitated, and the king, he will see reason once the choice is no longer hers to make. In the garden above, unaware of the exact words spoken against them, Leora and Daniel stood side by side, looking toward the horizon. Both could feel the change in the air. The storm was coming, and neither knew yet how hard it would strike. The day of the choosing ceremony dawned bright over Avarice Prime. The twin suns rose together, casting golden light over the white spires of the palace. Every quarter, balcony, and courtyard buzzed with activity. Nobles in jeweled robes arrived in flying carriages. Soldiers stood in polished armor along the pathways. Servants hurried with trays of rare fruits and crystal goblets of sparkling water. It was not just a royal ceremony, it was a display of the Empire's power. And today, every eye would be on Princess Leora. The Hall of Stars ceremony would be held in the Hall of Stars, a vast chamber with a domed ceiling that displayed a living map of the galaxy. The floor was made of glass, with streams of light flowing beneath it like rivers. At the far end stood the throne, where the king would preside. In front of him was a raised dais, where the princess would stand to declare her choice. Daniel stood at the edge of the gathering, feeling the weight of 100 curious gazes. He was dressed in a simple but formal robe gifted to him by the palace tailors. Nothing as grand as the noble's attire, but it was well made. He saw the other suitors, standing in a line. Tall, elegant alien nobles, each with perfect posture and practiced smiles. Many of them gave Daniel polite nods, though a few looked at him as though he were a stain on their robes. The ceremony begins. A clear chime rang through the hall. The crowd grew silent as the king stepped forward. "People of Avarice," his voice echoed, deep and steady. "Today we honor tradition. My daughter, Princess Leora, will choose the one who will stand beside her not only in life, but in guiding our world." The king's eyes swept over the suitors, then briefly over Daniel. There was no expression on his face. The master of ceremonies stepped forward. Each suitor will present themselves before the princess. She will hear their final words before making her decision. One by one, the suitors approached. Each spoke with confidence, offering promises of alliances, trade routes, or military strength. Some quoted poetry, others told grand stories of their victories. When it was Daniel's turn, the hall seemed to grow even quieter. He stepped forward and bowed not too deeply, but with respect. "Princess," he began, "I have no army. I have no great wealth. What I offer is myself, my loyalty, my honesty, and my willingness to stand with you, no matter the storm." His voice was calm, steady, and without ornament. "I came here to learn, and I have learned more than I could ever imagine about your world, your people, and your heart." When he stepped back, there were murmurs in the crowd, some approving, some doubtful. The pressure before the princess could speak, a counselor rose from his seat. "Your Majesty," he said, "we must consider the good of the realm. The princess's choice is not hers alone. It will shape the future of our empire. A foreigner cannot hold such a role." The hall stirred. A few nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. Leora's eyes narrowed slightly. "The tradition says I may choose," she reminded him. Her voice cooled. Another noble step forward. "Tradition also demands wisdom. Princess, you are young. Do not let feelings guide you where reason should lead." The king did not interrupt. His gaze rested on Leora, unreadable. The final words. Leora stood straight, her hands clasped before her. "I have heard your advice," she said. "I have listened to each suitor, and I have thought not only of my heart, but of my duty." The hall was silent now, every breath held. She turned slightly toward the suitors. "Many of you promise power, wealth, or safety. These are important. But I have learned something in these trials, that strength is not only in what you own, but in what you are willing to give." Her eyes rested briefly on Daniel. "One among you gave without asking for reward. He helped those who competed against him. He faced danger without thought for himself. And he spoke to me not as a prize, but as a person." A sharp murmur ran through the room. "The choice." Leora lifted her chin. "I choose Daniel of Earth." The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Some gasped. A few suitors looked stunned. Others clenched their jaws in anger. The counselor who had spoken earlier stepped forward quickly. "Princess, this..." The king raised his hand, stopping him. His voice was calm, but there was a new firmness to it. "The choice has been made." The reaction rose from some corners of the hall, small at first, then growing as members of the public gallery began to cheer. Others remained seated, their expressions tight. Daniel bowed deeply to Leora, his chest tight with emotion. She smiled at him, not the practiced royal smile, but the warm, honest one he had come to know. The king stood. "Daniel of Earth, by the will of the princess and in respect of tradition, you are welcomed into our royal house. May you serve with honor." Daniel stepped forward and bowed again. "I will." The shadow behind the curtain from the side of the hall, hidden behind a cluster of nobles, two figures watched with cold eyes. "It should not have happened," one whispered. "It has," the other replied. "But the game is not over. There are other ways to change the future." They turned and slipped away before the ceremony ended. The moment between them, when the formalities were over and the crowd began to disperse, Leora found Daniel standing by the tall windows overlooking the city. "You stood against them all," she said softly. "You stood for me first," he replied. Her eyes glimmered. "The road ahead will not be easy. There are those who will fight against this." Daniel gave a small smile. "Then we faced them together." Outside, the suns were beginning to set, casting the city in gold and red. For a brief moment, the world felt still, as if it were holding its breath for whatever would come next. And somewhere deep in the palace, the storm that had been gathering was not yet finished.